My name is Sienna Hart. I'm 32 years old, and I own a string of artisan bakeries in San Diego that people love to call inspiring. Like success somehow makes a story easier to hear. It doesn't. Because no matter how beautiful my life looks now, there's one sound that can still drag me straight back to being 8 years old. A phone ringing and ringing while I stand there, frozen, already knowing the person on the other end wants something I should have gotten decades ago. That day, my screen lit up again and again with numbers I didn't save, but somehow recognized anyway. I let it ring. 5 minutes. 10. 30. I kept frosting cakes, checking the ovens, signing invoices, acting like my hands weren't suddenly shaking. Because the last time I waited for those people, I was a little girl with a tiny suitcase, sitting on a hard plastic chair in a place that smelled like bleach and old blankets, listening to adults promise they would only leave me there for a little while. My mother took my brother, my father took my sister, and I was the one left behind at an orphanage, like I was the extra piece nobody had room to carry. For years there was nothing. No calls, no letters, no birthday cards, no footsteps coming back for me. Then one interview went viral. One article told the world what I had built with my own 2 hands, and suddenly the silence ended. They all wanted back in. They wanted explanations, forgiveness, maybe even a place at the table they once made sure I never had. But people love redemption stories because they never have to live inside the part where someone chooses to leave you first. Before I tell you who called me that day and why I let the phone ring until the silence started hurting them back, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I want to know how far this story reaches before I open the door to the past. Before my family broke apart, we looked normal from the outside. We lived in Tucson, Arizona, in a sun-baked one-story house with a cracked driveway and a lemon tree that never gave enough fruit, but somehow still got watered every weekend. My mother, Marlene, worked at a public elementary school, and my father, Daniel, managed shipping for a warehouse on the edge of town. My older brother, Owen, was the kind of boy adults called easy. He was smart, quiet, good at reading the room. My little sister Chloe was all curls and sticky fingers and questions. And me, I was the one in the middle, old enough to notice things, young enough to still believe love was supposed to be steady. When I think back now, I can still see the version of us that almost made it. Pancakes on Saturday mornings, cheap folding chairs in the backyard while burgers burned on the grill. Movie nights where Chloe fell asleep halfway through, and Owen pretended not to care when I tucked the blanket over both of us. For a while, home felt safe. Not perfect, but safe. Then my father lost his job. He said it was temporary. Then he said the company had restructured. Then he stopped saying much at all. My mother picked up extra hours and the air in the house changed before I even understood why. There were bills on the counter, whispered arguments at first, then full-volume fights that leaked under doors and down hallways. You can always tell when adults are lying about things being fine. They smile too fast. They ask too many questions about school. They avoid your eyes. My father started sleeping on the couch some nights. My mother stopped laughing at things that were supposed to be funny. Owen stayed in his room more. Chloe got clingy. And I became the kid who listened. I listened at the stairs. I listened through walls. I listened because nobody was telling me the truth, and I had a feeling the truth had my name in it. The night I realized how bad it was, I heard my mother say, "We cannot keep living like this." My father fired back. "Then leave." There was silence after that. Not calm silence, the kind that tells you something permanent has just entered the room. A week later, they told us they were separating. They said it gently, like soft voices could make a hard thing smaller. They sat us at the kitchen table and spoke like they were reading from a script they had rehearsed without us. They said it wasn't our fault. They said both of them loved us. They said families can change shape and still be families. Then real life started pushing through the cracks in the speech. Who would stay where? Who would move first? What school districts would work? What was affordable? That was the part they tried not to say in front of us. But kids hear everything that matters most. My mother wanted Owen with her because he was organized and calm and easier to move around with. My father wanted Chloe because she cried for him, and he said she needed stability. Nobody said my name first. Nobody fought for me. Nobody even said, "What about Sienna?" until I had already heard enough to know the answer wouldn't sound like love. Later that night, I stood in the hallway while they argued behind their bedroom door. "You take her," my mother snapped. My father shot back. "I can barely handle one kid right now. She's too emotional." Then my mother said the sentence that lived under my skin for years. She said, "Just for a little while, maybe Hope House can keep her until we get settled." Keep her. Like I was luggage. Like I was a box they needed out of the way until life felt easier. 2 days later, my mother packed my clothes into a small suitcase without folding them properly. My father drove. Nobody called it abandonment. They called it temporary. They called it a few weeks. They called it the best thing for everyone. Hope House sat behind a chain-link fence with a faded sign and a front office that smelled like coffee, paper, and disinfectant. A woman at the desk smiled at me in that careful way adults do when they know something terrible is happening, and they want credit for being gentle about it. My mother knelt in front of me and fixed my collar even though nothing was wrong with it. My father signed papers without looking up. Chloe was in the car. Owen stayed home with my aunt. Nobody wanted the moment to feel real. "We'll come back for you soon," my mother said, "as soon as things settle down." My father finally looked at me and said, "Be good, okay? It'll just be for a little while." I remember staring at both of them, waiting for one face to crack, waiting for one voice to break, waiting for one of them to decide this was insane and take me back to the car. Instead, they stood up. My mother kissed my forehead. My father picked up the pen he almost forgot. Then they walked out. They did not turn around. They did not wave. They did not come back that weekend. Or the next one. Or the one after that. The first night at Hope House, I slept in a narrow twin bed with a plastic mattress cover that crackled every time I moved. The room held 4 girls, but nobody spoke after lights out. One girl cried into her pillow. Another stared at the ceiling like she'd done it so often she could see something written there. I kept my shoes on because I thought maybe my parents would come late, and I'd need to be ready. That was the kind of child I still was then. Not angry yet, just prepared. The next morning, I sat near the window in the day room because I wanted the best view of the parking lot. I figured if they came, I'd see them first. A white sedan pulled in around noon and my heart nearly stopped, but it was a volunteer bringing canned goods. After lunch, a caseworker asked if I wanted to make a thank you card for my family for arranging safe care until they got back on their feet. I remember looking at her and thinking, "You don't know them at all." But I was 8 and scared. So I nodded and took the crayons. Every adult around me seemed more comfortable with the version of my story where I had not been left. So for a few days, I tried to live inside that version too. I made the card. I sat by the window. I counted weekends. By the second week, even the staff stopped using the phrase "when your family comes back" and started saying "if there are updates." There is a big difference between those two kinds of sentences. One keeps a child breathing. The other teaches her not to expect air. I learned the routines fast because routines were safer than feelings. Wake up. Make the bed tight. Line up for breakfast. Keep your tray straight. Don't ask too many questions. Don't talk back. Don't cry where the bigger kids can see you. At Hope House, sadness made you a target. Kids who had been there longer could smell fresh hope on you, and they hated it because they knew what came after it. One girl asked me on my 4th day, Did they say they were coming back? I nodded. She shrugged and said, "They always say that." Then she walked away like she'd just handed me a fact, not a blade. I stopped waiting by the window after that, but I still listened for footsteps. I still watched the front door every time it opened. I still believed certain sounds meant rescue. My caseworker, Ms. Bell, wore soft sweaters and spoke in a voice that always sounded like she was trying not to wake a sleeping baby. She asked me about my favorite foods, my school, my birthday, my siblings. She never asked the real question, the one sitting between us every time I saw her. Why didn't they take you? She called my parents. She left messages. She mailed forms. She told me they were working through a lot. I heard later that both of them had moved quickly, my mother into a rental across town with Owen, my father into a friend's place with Chloe until he found work again. In other words, they had managed to figure out life with the two children they wanted to keep. It was only me who had become too complicated. That truth arrived in pieces. First there were no calls, then there were no visits, then there was paperwork. Adults never say, "Your parents are choosing to disappear." They say things like delayed response and no current placement plan and temporary care extension, but it all means the same thing. One afternoon, I heard Ms. Bell talking outside her office. She didn't know I was around the corner. She said, "We may need to transfer her into long-term foster placement if the family remains non-responsive." Non-responsive. That word changed me. It sounded so clean, so professional, so much nicer than abandoned. Around the same time, I learned my mother had told relatives I was staying with family friends while things got sorted out. My father told people I was in a special school program. Everybody got a lie that made them comfortable. I got a bunk bed and a locker with a broken hinge. The part that hurt most was not hunger or rules or even fear. It was invisibility. My brother and sister still existed in their new homes. They had rooms, routines, bedtimes, school mornings. They were still inside the story of the family, even if it had split in half. I was the part everyone edited out. A child can survive a lot. What she cannot survive unchanged is the knowledge that when the adults in her life started making cuts, she was the easiest one to remove. At night, after lights out, I used to press my fist against my mouth to keep the sound in. I didn't want the other girls to hear me crying. I didn't want to sound like someone still waiting. But deep down, I was still waiting. Waiting for one grown-up to realize they had left a living, breathing daughter in a place designed for children nobody came back for. Waiting for one phone call that would say there had been a mistake. Waiting to matter enough for someone to be ashamed. That call never came. The week my 9th birthday passed with no card and no cake, and no voice from home. Something inside me went quiet. I stopped asking the staff whether there had been any updates. I stopped checking the parking lot. I stopped making excuses for people who had made a choice, and then built a whole new life around pretending it wasn't a choice at all. That was the year I learned how to become useful. Useful children get noticed less. Useful children cause less trouble. Useful children survive longer. So I cleaned tables. I folded laundry. I helped the younger girls tie their shoes and memorize the order of the cafeteria line. I swallowed every question that sounded too much like a wound. But even then, every now and then, usually right before sleep, one thought would float up no matter how hard I pushed it down. My mother took my brother. My father took my sister. And nobody took me. When I left Hope House for foster care, I thought maybe that meant my life was moving forward. Kids in children's homes imagine foster families the way lonely people imagine miracles. You picture a porch light, a woman who remembers your favorite cereal, a man who teaches you how to ride a bike if you somehow missed it the first time, a room that smells like detergent and safety. What I got instead was a series of houses where I learned how many different ways people can make you feel temporary. My first placement was with a couple who already had 3 boys and took foster kids for the stipend. They weren't monsters. That almost made it worse. Monsters are easier to hate. These people were just indifferent in a way that hollowed you out slowly. My clothes stayed in trash bags for months. I slept on a fold-out couch in a den with no door. Every time relatives visited, I was told to make myself scarce. I became very good at disappearing before anyone had to ask twice. When they decided they were overwhelmed and wanted to focus on their real family, I was moved again. That phrase stayed with me for years, too. Real family. As if I had been a rehearsal. My second placement had too many kids and too few adults paying attention. Food vanished fast. Privacy didn't exist. School changed again, and with it, the whole exhausting ritual of being the new girl with no clean answer when teachers asked where home was. I got good grades when I could, because being smart was the one thing that still felt like mine. But pain has a way of showing up in the body whether you invite it or not. I clenched my jaw so hard in my sleep I started waking with headaches. I jumped when doors slammed. I said sorry all the time, even when nobody was talking to me. Then came the foster mother who specialized in polished cruelty. In public, she baked casseroles for church drives and called every child sweetheart. In private, she knew exactly where to press. You should smile more. People don't like girls with that look on their face. Maybe if you were easier to love, somebody would have kept you. She never hit me. She didn't have to. She went after the part of me that still hoped I had been worth staying for. By then I had learned an ugly truth. Once a child has already been abandoned, the world assumes she can absorb a little more damage. Adults read survival as strength. They see a girl who is quiet and functioning and think she's fine, when really she has just gotten excellent at bleeding internally. The thing that saved me did not look heroic at first. It started in a kitchen. One of the houses sent me to help at a church meal program on Saturdays, because I was considered responsible, and because free labor always gets renamed character building when you're a foster kid. An older man there ran the baking station. His name was Ramon Ellis, though everyone called him chef even when he wasn't in a restaurant. He had silver at his temples, flour on his shirt half the time, and the kind of steady voice that made instructions feel safe. He showed me how to level flour with the back of a knife, how yeast had to wake up in warm water, not hot, how dough changed when you gave it time instead of force. The first time I pulled a tray of dinner rolls from the oven, I just stared at them. They had risen because of what I did. They had transformed because I had followed every step and stayed patient long enough for the change to happen. That may sound small to someone who grew up with ordinary comfort. To me, it felt like finding proof that care could lead somewhere. People had always been unpredictable. Rules had always changed. Love had always come with an exit. But baking responded to consistency. It rewarded attention. It asked for discipline, then gave you something warm in return. I started volunteering for every kitchen shift I could get. I learned to make biscuits, cinnamon rolls, braided loaves, simple fruit pies. Chef Ramon didn't flatter me. He corrected me when I rushed and made me start over when I got sloppy. But he also treated me like someone capable of mastery, not just someone in need. There is a huge difference between pity and respect, and I was old enough by then to know which one I was starving for. Around the same time, a guidance counselor named Mrs. Vivian Brooks noticed that whenever school asked students to write about the future, I stopped sounding like a foster kid filling out forms and started sounding like a woman building a life. She asked me once why I stayed after lunch to help cafeteria staff stack trays. I shrugged and said I liked kitchens. She said, "No, you like order. You like making things happen with your hands." That sentence hit me hard because it was the first time an adult had described me in a way that had nothing to do with damage. Mrs. Brooks helped me get into a vocational program with culinary electives. Chef Ramon helped me practice. I started waking up early to bake before school if I had access to a kitchen, and if I didn't, I wrote recipes in the margins of old notebooks and memorized measurements like prayer. Foster life did not suddenly get easy. I was still moved again after one placement ended. I still learned not to unpack too much. I still had nights where anger came up so hot I had to sit on my hands to keep from breaking something, but now there was a small, stubborn light inside me. Every time I kneaded dough, every time butter melted into flour, every time a crust turned golden at the edges, I felt less like the leftover child and more like somebody becoming. By 16, I was helping cater small church events and neighborhood gatherings. By 17, I was the person Chef Ramon trusted with the bread station without supervision. He told me once, "You have a gift, Sienna. But more than that, you have discipline. Talent makes noise. Discipline builds a life." Nobody in my biological family ever gave me words like that. Nobody told me I had something worth growing. The people who had made me did not stay long enough to see who I was. But two strangers did. An old baker with flour on his sleeves, and a counselor who noticed where my eyes lit up. They were the first people who taught me something I would spend the rest of my life proving true. Being left behind does not mean you are meant to stay there. It only means you will have to build your own road out. I aged out of the system at 18 with one duffel bag, a folder full of paperwork nobody really explains to foster kids until it's too late, and a scholarship to a community college culinary program that felt way too small to carry the size of my hunger. Not hunger for food, hunger for control. Hunger for a future nobody could take because nobody had given it to me in the first place. I moved into a shared apartment in San Diego with two other girls who didn't care where I came from, as long as I paid rent on time and kept the sink clean. That was one of the first freedoms adulthood gave me. Nobody asked me to perform gratitude for being allowed to stay. I enrolled in classes during the day and worked mornings at a diner that served breakfast to men in work boots and women in scrubs who smelled like perfume and exhaustion. At night, I cleaned equipment at a small bakery in North Park until my back ached and my fingers went numb from hot water and sanitizer. I did homework at bus stops. I memorized inventory costs while waiting tables. I lived on coffee, toast, and the kind of determination that borders on anger if you get close enough to it. By then, I understood something most people don't learn until much later. Stability is expensive. Peace is expensive. Not having to beg is expensive. And when you come from nothing, every ordinary thing feels like a mountain with bills attached. I started selling my own pastries at a weekend farmer's market using recipes I had spent years refining. Honey sea salt rolls, brown butter muffins, cardamom buns that sold out before 10 in the morning when the weather was cold enough for people to want comfort. At first, I was just trying to cover gas and textbooks. Then I noticed something. People came back. They brought friends. They asked where my shop was. I didn't have one. Not yet. But for the first time, yet sounded more powerful than never. That market is where I met Tessa Monroe. She had a booth nearby selling handmade ceramic mugs and talked faster than anyone I'd ever met. Tessa had a business brain wrapped in a messy bun and a leather jacket. She looked at my pricing board one morning and said, "You're undercharging by at least 20% and smiling like it's a personality trait." I laughed because nobody had ever critiqued me that casually without trying to make me feel small. She became my first real friend in adulthood. Not a counselor, not a mentor, a friend. The kind who showed up with coffee when I had a breakdown over rent and who could look at a spreadsheet like it was gossip. A few months later, I met Adrian Cole. He came into the bakery where I worked nights because his architecture firm was doing late hours nearby, and for a full week, he ordered the same black coffee and one plain croissant like he was too tired to choose joy. On the 8th day, he asked who made the orange rosemary scones. I said I did. He took one bite and closed his eyes like he was having a spiritual experience in front of the pastry case. I should have found that ridiculous. Instead, I laughed so hard I had to look away. Adrian was careful with people in a way that made me suspicious at first. Men who are too gentle can feel unreal when your nervous system has been trained on instability. But he never pushed. He never tried to fix my past or drag my story out of me before I was ready. He liked my ambition. He respected my boundaries. He asked real questions and waited for real answers. That patience made room for trust. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic movie scene. Slowly. The only kind of slowly I had learned to believe in. I transferred from community college into a business-focused culinary extension program and started mapping a future bigger than surviving shifts. Tessa kept telling me I needed a brand, not just recipes. Adrian helped me think visually about space and flow and why people return to certain rooms. Chef Ramon, who still called me kid even when I was legally grown, reminded me not to chase aesthetics so hard I forgot substance. Somewhere in the middle of all that, the name came to me. Second Morning. Because some people get one clean beginning, and some of us have to build a second one with our own hands. I started with pop-ups, then private catering for small creative events, then a breakfast window inside a shared food hall that barely fit 2 employees and a mixer, but felt like proof of concept. I was terrified the whole time, terrified the market would cool off, terrified I'd miss payroll, terrified every success would reveal I had gotten too comfortable and forgotten that life can still take things. But fear is different when it's riding next to purpose. It still talks. It just doesn't get to steer. The morning a local blog wrote that my cardamom buns were the best baked thing to happen to San Diego brunch culture in years, I cried in the dry storage room for 5 full minutes, with a bag of flour under one arm like it was a witness. It wasn't really about the blog. It was about the distance between that moment and the girl on the plastic mattress who had once believed she was too inconvenient to keep. I opened my first full store at 27. White tile, warm wood, open shelving, a long communal table because I wanted strangers to sit near each other and maybe feel less alone while eating something good. We hired 2 former foster youth in the first year because I knew exactly what it meant to age out with no network and nowhere soft to land. I was not interested in building a pretty business with a sad origin story attached like decoration. I wanted to build something that fed people, literally, emotionally, practically. Something that turned what had nearly ruined me into the opposite of ruin. Business grew. So did my confidence. So did the part of me that no longer measured worth by whether someone came back. And somewhere along the way, without making any announcement about it, I stopped searching for my family. I stopped typing names into social media. Stopped imagining accidental reunions in grocery store aisles. Stopped wondering if maybe they had suffered enough to earn their way back into the story. I had too much to do. Too much to protect. Too much life of my own. That was the strange beauty of success after abandonment. It did not erase the wound. It just stopped the wound from being the center of every room I walked into. By 32, Second Morning had grown from one narrow breakfast window into 8 locations across San Diego County, each one built around the same idea that had saved me years earlier in somebody else's kitchen. Consistency, warmth, dignity, good bread, real coffee. A room where nobody had to earn the right to stay seated. Newspapers loved my story once it became polished enough for print. Local anchors called me resilient. Lifestyle magazines called me self-made. They put me in linen blazers and photographed me beside racks of pastries like survival had been a branding exercise instead of a private war. I understood the value of press, so I smiled and did the interviews. But every time someone said orphan turned entrepreneur, I had to resist the urge to ask whether they wanted the version with the nice lighting or the one with the hunger and panic attacks and years of being treated like temporary furniture. Still, The coverage helped, so I used it. We launched a paid apprenticeship program for young adults aging out of foster care. We partnered with a housing nonprofit. We started offering free budgeting workshops once a month out of our flagship location because nobody teaches kids in the system what adulthood actually costs until the rent is due. Tessa ran operations like a field general in gold hoops. Adrian eventually designed my third and fourth stores, then kept designing the next ones because apparently mixing romance with commercial build-out is sustainable if both people know how to argue without making the room unsafe. My life was not perfect, but it was mine in a way that still moved me sometimes. I had a home with plants I kept alive on purpose. I had a partner who knew when to hold me and when to leave me alone. I had people who called, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to know how my day had been. I had built a life sturdy enough that my past no longer felt like a trapdoor under every good thing. Then I agreed to do a television interview. It was a local feature at first, just a human interest segment about small business growth and community impact. But the anchor asked one unexpected question near the end. She said, "You talk a lot about creating a second chance for other young people. Where does that come from for you personally?" And maybe I was tired. Maybe I was ready. Maybe some part of me wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my own body for once. So I told it. Not every brutal detail, but enough. I said I had been left in a children's home at 8. I said I spent my childhood moving through the foster system. I said the work I do now is built on the kind of support I wish somebody had fought to give me earlier. The clip went online that evening. Then a bigger account reposted it. Then a newspaper picked it up and wrote a longer piece with old photos, business numbers, and a headline about what I had built after being abandoned by both parents. That word finally appeared in print. Abandoned. I stared at it for a long time on my phone and felt no shame. Only clarity. 3 days later, the calls started. The first one came while I was reviewing payroll in the back office. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then another. Then another. By lunchtime, there were 6 missed calls and a voicemail from a voice I had not heard in over 20 years and still recognized instantly because trauma stores sound in places logic can't reach. It was Owen. His voice had gotten deeper, but the rhythm of it was the same. He said, "Sienna, it's me. I know this is a shock. Please, call me back. There's a lot you don't know." I sat so still after that message ended that one of my assistant managers knocked on the office door to ask if I was okay. I said yes, which was not true, but also not entirely false. I was functional. That had been my version of okay for most of my life. The second voicemail came from Chloe that evening. She cried before she finished saying my name. The third was my mother. She sounded older, breathier, like regret had weight in her chest. Then my father called. Then Owen again. Then my mother again. Then texts started arriving, each one trying a different tone. "We need to talk. Please, just hear us out. There's so much you were never told. We've been looking for you. Your father is sick. Your mother is beside herself. Chloe wants to see you. Owen says he never stopped thinking about you." I let every call ring out. 5 minutes. 10. 30. Just like that first day in my office when my hands shook over a tray of invoices and I understood, with awful precision, what was happening. They had seen me. Not the child they left. The woman I became without them. The businesses. The articles. The photos. The version of me that looked valuable. People always ask whether success is the best revenge. I think that depends on what kind of success you mean. If success means being so visibly okay that the people who broke you suddenly want access again, then yes, it has a cruel little edge to it. Because the truth is, Their silence had lasted until my life became something they could point at, lean on, or possibly benefit from. And I knew enough about human timing by then to understand that timing is often motive wearing a polite coat. I did not call them back right away. I listened to the voicemails twice, then forwarded the numbers to Tessa, who has the instincts of a private investigator trapped inside a businesswoman's body. She didn't do anything illegal. She just knew how to look at public records, social media, local news archives, and the internet footprints people leave when their lives stop holding together neatly. By the end of the week, the picture was ugly enough to make the timing of their sudden love feel even dirtier. My mother, Marlene, had remarried years after the divorce, then divorced again 18 months earlier. Her second husband left after a long stretch of financial problems she had apparently hidden from almost everyone. My father, Daniel, had developed serious health issues and was living alone in a one-bedroom rental outside Phoenix after burning through what little savings he had. Owen worked in regional sales until he got tangled in an expense fraud investigation and lost his job. Chloe, according to Tessa, had been on and off with both parents for years and had at some point learned enough of the truth about me to pull back hard. In other words, life had done what conscience never managed to do. It had cornered them. Suddenly my story wasn't a family shame they could bury. It was a door they wanted reopened, because maybe the daughter they threw away had grown into someone useful. Maybe I should tell you that was the moment all my feelings shut off, and I turned into ice. That would make for a cleaner revenge story. It would also be a lie. What I felt was complicated. Rage, yes. Disgust, absolutely. But also grief. The old kind, the humiliating kind, the kind that doesn't care how successful you are. Because even when you know exactly who people are, there is still a part of you that notices how long it took them to want you and bleeds anyway. I finally agreed to meet them on one condition: not at anybody's house, not in Arizona, not over some sentimental family meal where they could act like memory was the same thing as repair. I told them to come to San Diego and meet me after closing hours at my flagship store. Neutral ground, except it wasn't neutral at all. It was my ground, my ovens, my staff gone home, my table, my rules. They arrived together on a Tuesday evening just after 7. I saw them through the front windows before I unlocked the door, and for one surreal second, they looked like a family in an ordinary scene, standing under the soft light outside a bakery, shifting their weight, waiting to be let in. Then I remembered what families do when they want to keep you, and the image broke. My father looked smaller than I remembered, not just thinner but dimmer somehow, like life had scraped him down. My mother had the same hands, still restless when nervous, twisting the strap of her purse. Owen carried himself with the careful politeness of someone who knew he needed mercy and had no right to ask for it. Chloe looked at me the way people look at a grave they've finally located after years of not knowing where to stand. I let them in. Nobody hugged me. Good. They sat at the long communal table where strangers usually shared pastries on Sunday mornings, and for a while nobody knew how to begin. Finally, my mother whispered, "You look beautiful." It was such a useless sentence in that room that I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "You didn't come here to describe my face. Start talking." Owen tried first. He said they had all been through hard times. He said there were things I never understood as a child. He said everyone had regrets. My father said he had been overwhelmed, broke, ashamed, drinking too much. My mother said she had been drowning and thought I would be safer in temporary care than in the chaos they were living through. Chloe cried and said she had only learned the full truth a few years earlier, that she'd been told I was with family, then told the system had made contact impossible, then told so many versions she stopped knowing what was real. I let them talk. I let them explain. I let them rearrange the past until all the sharpest corners had almost disappeared. Then I stood up, walked behind the counter, and came back with 4 slim folders I had prepared the night before. Each one held copies, dates, placement records, school transfer forms, notes from caseworkers, aged-out paperwork, a birthday intake form with no emergency contact listed. I placed one folder in front of each of them. My hands were steady. My voice was too. That surprised even me. "You all keep using words like hard and overwhelmed and complicated," I said. "So let me simplify it for you. You did not lose me. You left me." Nobody moved. I kept going. I told them about Hope House and the window I used to sit by. I told them about the foster home where my clothes stayed in trash bags, the woman who smiled in public and whispered poison in private. The nights I rationed food because I didn't know if enough would still be there in the morning. The schools where I learned not to mention parents because pity made people awkward and cruelty made them interested. The headaches, the insomnia, the way I apologized for existing well into adulthood because somewhere along the line I had absorbed the idea that needing anything was dangerous. My mother started crying halfway through. My father stared at the paperwork like it might blur if he didn't fully look at it. Owen covered his mouth. Chloe wept openly. I did not stop. I had waited too long to be interrupted by tears that should have come decades earlier. Then I told them about Chef Ramon, about Mrs. Brooks, about Tessa and Adrian and the life I built from scratch. I told them because I wanted them to understand something essential. They were not sitting across from a broken child who had survived by accident. They were sitting across from a woman who had been rebuilt by people with no obligation to love her and no blood tie forcing them to stay. That was their indictment. Strangers did what family refused to do. When I finished, silence settled over the room with real weight. Then my father said the thing I think he believed would move me most. He said, "I know I don't deserve this, but I'm sick, Sienna. I don't have much time, and I wanted to make things right before it's too late." My mother reached for my hand, then stopped when I didn't move. Owen admitted he had hoped maybe I would help the family get through this stretch, that maybe with everything I had built, there was a way to support our father's care, maybe help him get somewhere better, maybe even help Owen get back on his feet after what he called one terrible mistake. That was the moment the room changed. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. Some part of me had expected it, but hearing it out loud stripped the last layer of performance away. There it was. The need beneath the nostalgia, the urgency beneath the apology. They had not found me because love finally outran shame. They had found me because my success looked like shelter. I leaned back in my chair and looked at each of them one by one. Then I said the most honest thing I had ever said to my family. I did not build this life so the people who abandoned me could come back and use it as a landing pad. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. Maybe, in a way, I had. Chloe started saying she wasn't asking for money, only a chance. I believed part of that. Maybe even most of it. She had been younger than Owen and more lied to than I was comfortable ignoring. So I gave her the only softness I had left to offer. I told her that maybe, over time, there could be a conversation between us. Just us. Slow. Honest. No rewriting. No pressure. She nodded through tears because even she understood that slow was more than they deserved. Then I turned back to the others. I told my mother that thinking about me every day while doing nothing was not motherhood. I told my father that a deathbed apology is still late. I told Owen that being a child once explained his silence, but being a grown man for years did not. I said I hoped they all got therapy. I hoped they told the truth from now on. I hoped they learned to live with what they had done without asking me to carry the emotional cost of making them feel forgiven enough to sleep. Then I set my boundaries plainly. I would not give them money. I would not fund medical care. I would not pose for a healing family photo. I would not let them come in and out of my life based on need. If any future contact happened, it would happen on my terms, in writing first, and only if honesty remained in the room. My father cried then, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when pride has finally run out of useful lies. My mother said she was sorry over and over until the words started sounding less like language and more like collapse. Owen asked if there was anything they could do. I said yes. Tell the truth. Tell everyone who still believes your cleaner version of the story exactly what you did. Stop calling what happened a misunderstanding. Stop hiding behind the word temporary. Say it correctly for once. You left your daughter in care and built new lives around her absence. That is the truth. Live with it. They stayed another 20 minutes. Maybe less. No one touched the coffee I offered out of habit. When they left, I locked the door behind them and stood alone in the quiet bakery with the lights low and the smell of tomorrow's dough cold fermenting in the walk-in. Adrian arrived 10 minutes later because Tessa had texted him when the meeting started. He didn't ask me whether it went well. Smart man. He just opened his arms, and I stepped into them. I wish I could tell you that was the end. It wasn't. Endings like that are never one clean cut. There were follow-up emails. A letter from my mother. One from Owen. A shorter one from my father after a hospital stay. Chloe and I exchanged a few careful messages over the next several months. Nothing dramatic. Nothing warm too quickly. Just truth. Finally used for something other than delay. But the revenge, if you want to call it that, had already happened. Not because they suffered, though they did. Not because I made them hurt, though I refused to soften what they had done. The real revenge was this. They saw exactly what I became without them. They saw the life, the work, the respect, the peace, the chosen family, the purpose. And they understood that none of it belonged to them. They did not get to return at the end and call themselves part of the miracle. They were the fire, not the rebuilding. These days, part of every quarterly profit from Second Morning goes into a foundation that funds housing assistance, work training, and emergency grants for young adults aging out of foster care. I started it because no child should have to become extraordinary just to survive what adults failed to do. That is the lesson I care about now. Children remember who stayed. They remember who made excuses. They remember which adults protected them and which ones protected their own comfort instead. And when those children grow up, they deserve more than empty apologies. They deserve safety. They deserve dignity. They deserve the right to set boundaries without being called cruel. I have forgiven some things, mostly so I would not have to keep drinking poison every time I remembered their names. But forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to my front door. The little girl they left behind still lives somewhere inside me. I don't silence her anymore. I don't tell her to move on faster for other people's convenience. I listen to her. I protect her. I built a life big enough that she never has to sit by another window waiting for footsteps that won't come. And if there is one truth I hope somebody hearing this carries with them, it is this. Family is not proven by blood. Family is proven by who stays when staying is hard.